Good afternoon. My name is Swati Taneja. I'm the Training Production Director with Informa. I'm delighted to welcome all our attendees today on an informative webinar on the Circle of Leadership Development. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. The webinar will be led by Kurt Alexander. But before we begin, I would like to give you a few tips and rules for the webinar and our housekeeping for the next 45 minutes. The slides that you'll be seeing will be available on our slide share page and the link will be emailed to you in the next couple of days. The recording of the webinar will be also made available to download, and the link for the same will be emailed in the next couple of days. Please take the time to complete a post-webinar survey that will pop at the end of the webinar. You can always type your questions throughout the session, and there will be enough time allocated in the end for your speaker to address your questions. Now I'd like to welcome Kurt Alexander, who's our webinar speaker for the afternoon. Just to give you a bit of a background for Kurt, he has over 22 years of experience in general management, admin management, and project management, and has been doing extensive finance training and consulting work for us with Informa in the Middle East and in Australia. With that, I'll hand over to your webinar speaker for the afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the next 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Swati. Much appreciated. I'd like to thank Informa for putting on this webinar. And our topic today is an extraction from our Excellence in Leadership for Managers course, available from Informa here in Dubai, or for in-house training as well. Just on that, the in-house training platforms are tremendous to understanding the team dynamics from within the company and to build these strengths and to understand our weaknesses as well. The webinar is entitled The Circle of Leadership. The three main topics we're going to cover this afternoon are going to be the arrows of leadership, the patterns, predictability, and CCS. The CCS stands for comfort, control, and security. We're also going to discuss how to instill trust, and we're going to discuss understanding and dealing with the three attitudes of all employees. But first, let's discuss leadership. What is leadership? A person who creates an inspiring vision of the a person who creates an inspiring vision of the future. Leadership is also a person who motivates and inspires people to engage with that vision. Leadership or manager. The difference between a leadership and a manager is the company wants a manager. That's what the company basically wants for performing its strategic goals and plans. But the staff want a leader. That's where we find a lot of difficulty within the two categories of managers and leaders, is that the company wants the manager, but the staff really want a leader. So the companies must start to train leaders if they're going to retain their staff. And also, the employees must start to see managers as someone they want to follow, someone they want to emulate. Just like in the previous slide, you must understand the funnel, the strategic plan to the employees. I find in my consulting across the Asia Pacific region and the Middle East that the strategic plan is never really brought down below a management level. It's never really brought down to the middle management or the lower management. It seems to get stuck up in the upper stratosphere of management, and the employees and the general staff know nothing about the strategic plan. The employees need the vision. Employees do not follow managers, they follow leaders. So here's our 3 arrows of our leadership. Patterns, which then produce predictability, which then produce the CCS. So let's first of all talk about patterns. What are they really? Well, they are a regular and intelligible form or sequence discernible in which way something happens or is done. It's also a discernible regularity. These are the things that we must instill in our leaders in order to make them effective. So we have to learn to recognize these patterns as well. Now, in patterns, we can have good patterns and bad patterns. So we must achieve a pattern of a leader in a good perspective and not a bad one. We must base our expectation of a person off of experience, not really perception. Let's first of all talk about bad patterns. Bad patterns are irregular and intelligible. Bad patterns, are laziness. That's the number one in most of the surveys. Gallup has put out polls in early 2015 which say that most of the employees see the managers as being lazy. That is definitely not a good pattern to follow. The second aspect of a bad pattern is it's never changing or adapting. It's always staying stagnant. There's no growth and there's no development. A third action is that any action seen as an us versus them mentality. I see this continually in my consulting in various different industries about the employees and the separation of the managers or the senior management is always an us-them mentality. Next, we look at the evolving leadership should never rely on the same outcome patterns. Okay? It should always rely on the situation and the information from that situation. Each situation must be treated differently. There is hardly ever a time that you would treat a same situation with one employee as you would with another. Each one deserves a different response. You have to treat each instance with the appropriate responses. It's like raising your children. Raising one of your children, even though it may be a boy or a girl, will be totally different than when you're raising another child. You know what that individual child will want, how they react to situations, so you must treat them separately. So now we've talked about bad patterns. Let's talk about good patterns. So good patterns make people feel safe. It gives them a security. It gives them a feeling of trust. It's also good to make decisions. There's a lot of managers out there and leaders that never really end up making a decision and never really end up taking responsibility for that decision. The other thing we must do in a good pattern of a leader is to lead by example. One of my favorite traits is that I never ask an employee or a fellow coworker to do something that I wouldn't do myself. We must forge the team together. We must bring together the cohesiveness and the bonding of each and every team member. Here's the next one, is that just get out of the way. Let your employees have the freedom and don't micromanage them to allow them to grow and develop. As a leader and as a manager, our vision and our primary goal must be one of oversight and not micromanagement. The next thing is we must communicate expectations. We have to make sure that we're clear and precise about what we want and what we expect, and also about the consequences for not performing or not completing the tasks that we ask the employees to complete. The next point is that we have to challenge people to think. I find in the workplace, if you give people the opportunity to think, they will come up with ideas more relevant to the situation or the process than what somebody who hasn't been in the industry as long, or somebody who doesn't know some of the pitfalls of that industry themselves. We must be accountable to others. So we must show that as a leader or a manager that we're accountable to others, and therefore we can expect the people in the employ of that leader or manager to be accountable and responsible to that leader as well. We must lead by example. We must measure and reward. If we don't measure and reward, we end up asking the world of every employee, and yet we actually deliver nothing. So it's best to measure and reward. I'm not talking about rewarding a person or employee for every single thing they do, because all of our jobs require us to produce an outcome without reward, but to make sure and highlight and acknowledge jobs above and beyond the call of duty. And the last instance is to do your job. So if you end up doing your job as a leader, then you can expect your fellow employees to do their jobs as well. Now these patterns lead to predictability, which is our arrow number 2. So predictability is how to stay ahead of the others. One of the most important and overlooked characteristics of a good leader must have is consistency or predictability. And predictability leads to a more engaged workforce. Now, the things that I want to make absolutely clear is that people want stability. Predictability leads to that stability. But predictability is not routine. Okay, so don't get those confused. A lot of people think predictability is that I have to react to the same situation the same every time. That is not the case. An example is if we have a task to be completed, who do we assign that task to? The guy who's always late, the guy who never finishes his work, or the guy who is consistent at his work and we know will not have to micromanage his work? The first two guys would be classified as routine, which is what predictability is not. Predictability is not routine. The guy who's always late could be classified as routine because he's routinely late every single time. The guy who doesn't complete his work task could be routine as well because he never completes his work. Okay, but they could not be called predictable because we do not really know what they're going to do. One day they do this, the next day they do that. Some wisdom from Steve Jobs, and the co-founder of Apple and Google. If you study their leadership patterns in their management, which seem to attract a lot of interest for employment in those two industries because of their work commitment and their work ethics, is Steve Jobs says that he looks for predictability and consistency in our staff. That's the two main characteristics that they look for in all of their staff. And that's what we as leaders in our industry as well, that's what we must be looking at as well. There's four main reasons why you need predictability. The first one being is we live in unpredictable and uncertain times. Work should be a secure place for people to go to get as much certainty as they can. They should feel secure, and it should be a second home to most people. The next point is that leaders must be disciplined. If you can't control your own behavior and attitude, your own mood, how can you expect the people that follow you to control theirs? You need stability, and stability comes from discipline. The third point is being inconsistent wastes your employees' valuable time. They spend time worrying about which way you're going to jump and how you're going to react, and this is the time they could be doing their work instead of trying to anticipate your next move. So being consistent. The fourth point and the final point is whatever behavior you model will be followed by your employees. So if you are funny and value humor, there'll be laughter in your workplace. If you're late to meetings or to work, your staff will be too. If you respond to informants, then you will create a culture or a workplace of informants. So the third arrow is CCS, comfort, control, and security. It's a self-preservation mode. It's found predominantly throughout all types of management because people are more focused on keeping their jobs than they are trying to improve the workplace. So what are you looking for as a leader? Comfort, control, or security? Most of the leaders are looking for all of the above. But all of the above are a coping pattern that we use to stay a manager and never really become a leader. In the workforce today, we have managers everywhere, but we have very few leaders, which is why this topic is so near and dear to me, because if we make our managers leaders, we'll have better staff retention, and we'll have a better workplace, and we'll be more productive. So let's talk about that first C, comfort. A leader must emulate the comfort zone and adapt a learning zone approach. The second point, it may seem safe in the comfort zone, but it will trap you and eventually kill all desire. The third thing is, a leader expects to encounter negative people. So don't be surprised when you get pushed out of your comfort zone being a leader, because you should actually anticipate and expect to encounter negative people or negative situations. If you look at navigators or explorers, you'll see that they never stay in the comfort zone. They're always pushing the boundaries, trying new things, new advancements. And that's why new things are discovered and achievements made, is because they push those boundaries. People who try and fail for this reason should never be ridiculed or punished. They're trying to escape the comfort zone, and they need encouragement. So if you have a person in your workplace who is trying and failing and trying and failing, never discourage them, always encourage them. The next C that we talk about is control. A leader has to know the difference between control and influence. Forbes states that a leader simply operates at their best when they understand their ability to influence is much more fruitful than their ability to control. It's imperative that a leader know the difference and the reactionary response between control and influence. The concept of a leader is not to shine the light on yourself, but to unlock the potential of all your staff to achieve more than any one person could do. A leader is just a representation of a group of people. It's not the only person in that group, it's a representation of that group. Which leads me to my last point on control, which is the old command and control leadership is not an effective tool for a leader in the 21st century. In previous centuries, that's the way that things got accomplished and completed, is because people took command and control, and people were forced or persuaded into doing what was exactly required. That leads for no productivity, no innovative thinking, and it kills all sorts of self-esteem. So the last one in our CCS is security. If a leader is looking for security, then they have to be looking at learning. There's no way that you can continue to do your job as a manager and expect to become a leader if you're not interested in learning. You have to be continually metamorphosizing yourself into a better individual And to do that is by learning. And we learn through either courses, textbooks, TV, personal influence, by other great leaders, but we have to continue the learning process. Job security, on the negative side of this, is a leader's worst thought. A leader and a true leader is never looking for job security. A true leader is looking for cutting-edge principles and techniques that will further his department or her department and allow them to excel from within that company. If you're an active, forward-thinking manager, you will naturally lean toward advancing instead of the security mode. Great leaders do not even consider job security, for they know that the mindset changes when you feel secure and you lose your cutting edge of productive thinking. The moment that you feel secure, you go into a hibernation mode instead of a proactive mode. This is the reason that most leaders never advance and stay in the same position. So the second topic we have this afternoon is how to instill trust. Now, there's two main dimensions in trust, and trust is born out of each one of these. First of all, we have character, and the second one we have is competence. So I'm going to briefly explain the primary sections of character and competence, and then we'll drill further down into this and have a look at that. The first one for character is motive. Next one's integrity, and the next one is intent with people. These three things are primary for a person to develop character. The second one, competence, is built out of capabilities, your skills, the results you get, and the track record that you have. So let's take a closer look at these two traits of trust. Character, the first one we discussed. Basically, it's how others see you, who others see you as. So it's a outward looking at yourself. The first section they see is the motive. So what is the reason behind the action or the reaction? They're looking for three primary things in character: motive, integrity, and intent with people. So in motive, what was the reason behind the action or reaction? With integrity, it's an adherence to a strict moral or ethical code, being unimpaired, sound, whole, and undivided. Basically, integrity is doing the right thing for the right reason, even when there's no one watching. It's probably one of the highest sought-after traits in leadership, and one of the hardest ones to obtain if you're not really disciplined. Because if you're not consistent with doing the right thing for the right reason when no one's watching, you'll never obtain integrity. The last one we're going to talk about in character is the intent with people, being purposeful with all people. The main thing that we need to do when we deal with people is be purposeful, that we're not wasting their time, and therefore they won't waste our time. Now, number one, the motive, that can be used in a positive or a negative way. With number two, integrity, it's always used for a good purpose, never for a bad purpose. So the second part of these traits to instill trust is competence. Now this is an inward-looking approach. It's who you see yourself as. So with that, there's four primary sections to competence. The first one is capabilities. We have to ask ourselves, what is my capability? Am I comfortable with my level of knowledge? Do I need more training? Am I satisfied with my skill level in this area? We have to continually ask ourselves these. The second one is our skills. Do I possess the skills needed? Am I confident in the areas I need to be? We need to be asking ourselves this continually in order to build competence within the workforce. The third area is results. Results end up being, do I like the results I'm seeing within myself and others? These last 2 points come from being totally honest when looking at yourself. And you have to ascertain, do I like the results I'm seeing within myself and that are reflected in others? Because if you don't like the results you're seeing in others, they're probably picking up those traits and those habits directly from you as their leader. The last section for competence is track record. Now, the track record, it's also inward looking, and it's also being honest with yourself. If I'm honest with myself, do I really have a great track record? Do I really have a history of good engagement as a leader? That's a big question to ask, and one that each and every one of us as a leader have to ask ourselves. With the last one, even if you don't have a great track record, the question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to change? We talked about the ability to change and the ability to upskill. This is a big one. Even though if we honestly say, I haven't had a great track record, we have to be willing to make that change. So that is the question we have to ask ourselves. The last section that we're going to talk about today is the section of understanding and dealing with the 3 attitudes of all employees. Now, through studies, they've come up to have 3 main attitudes of employees. The first one is the cognitive. Now, if we can as leaders understand these attitudes, we will then be able to be equipped to recognize where that attitude's coming from and how to combat those attitudes. So this section is really important because you have to be able to know where that person is coming from, where that attitude or where that lack of attitude is coming from, and then how to correct and maintain a good attitude in the workplace. So at the cognitive, it deals with a thought or belief. A thought or belief could be that all production workers are lazy. So it's not based on theory, it's not based on proof, but it's based on a thought or belief. And we can pick up those thoughts or beliefs from anywhere. They can be hereditary. They can be instilled from other senior managers. They can be inputs from family or friends. But it's a thought or belief. That's the cognitive side of the attitude. Now we talk about the affective. Now the affective goes beyond a thought or belief, and it's a feeling or emotion. So now there's a personal stake in it. And in that we may feel like they may hate production workers because they see them as lazy. So now there's a personal emotion or feeling attached with that, which makes it more stronger than a cognitive belief, because now there's a personal investment into this. And the last one is behavior. So behavior deals with an action. So an action, we better keep those production workers away from the good staff. Now, it's the ending of the 3 common attitudes because now it's firmly entrenched. It went initially from the cognitive, which was a thought or belief, into being felt and creating an emotion in the affective, and now it's a behavior. And behaviors are habitual. They're harder to break. They're harder to deal with because we need to be starting to pick up and ascertain the employees' attitudes at the cognitive stage. That's where it's easiest to make the changes, at the cognitive. If we wait until it becomes a behavior, then it becomes more ingrained and a lot more difficult to remove. A lot of people who have strong behavior attitudes will not want to make the change because it is so ingrained. It's in their nature to go ahead and feel that way because they don't have the tools to make the change, because it is a lot harder to make that change. So we have to explore the mental state or the neural state of an individual to understand where they're coming from. And these three attitudes, the cognitive, the affective, and the behavior, are exactly where we need to start. So if we examine attitudes, we'll have a quick look at how attitudes help us to see situations as how we behave toward that situation or object. So our attitude is actually a precursor to how we're going to behave in a certain situation or dealing with an object, dealing with a workmate, dealing with a manager, dealing with senior management, dealing with other co-workers. Our attitudes are influenced by our work, and our work is influenced by our attitudes. This is a continual circle that a lot of times employees will bring their home life into the workplace, and conversely, they'll take their work life into their home life. So the attitudes are influenced by our work, and our work is influenced by our attitudes. The same goes for home life. These interactions may cause conflict between a person's attitude and their behavior. So now there's a conflict between those two, because not only have they preconceived a behavioral attitude at work, maybe what they are used to dealing with is totally different, and now there's the conflict. This technically is referred to as cognitive dissonance. It's a major psychological experience that psychologists spend a lot of time and effort dealing and helping people overcome these attitudes. So let's have a look at our attitudes and see where they're formed. Attitudes are formed as a result of a few major things. One is our learning. In our learning, we then take and go past the cognitive into the affective, which makes it emotional, and then start our behavioral. That is the process of learning and schooling. The second point is by modeling others. So we see someone that we want to become like, or some person that we think has something to emulate. So that is another aspect of how our attitudes are formed, because we take on somebody else's perception. The third thing is a direct experience with people. So we have a direct experience with a senior manager or with a CEO, a CFO, and now we pick up and we emulate that attitude because we see their position as something to obtain to, and we think that because they have that attitude or that disposition, that that is how we will get there. That is definitely wrong thinking. The last one we talk about is our direct experiences with our situations or work. So in the workplace, there's a tremendous amount of time spent in work. People form friendships in the workplace, and they spend as much time in the workplace as they do with their own families. So therefore, their experiences in the workplace will shape and mold their behaviors. So the thought or belief that they have in the cognition stage, then becomes personal and emotional, which then becomes a behavior, and then is entrenched within that individual. So the last section that we're going to talk about is dealing with attitudes. In dealing with attitudes, we have to look at two primary areas. First of all, we must start with the cognitive area first. As I said before, this is where we need to be knowledgeable of spotting these cognitive areas within all sorts of people under our leadership, to be able to stem the attitude at the very beginning instead of it becoming an entrenched behavior. If the belief of an individual is that the manager does not know what he or she is talking about, then you have to change that belief. And in order to change that belief, you have to then be the example that their initial belief, their cognitive section of their mind, their belief or their intuition is totally wrong. And in that, you then have to lead by example and not by dictatorship. That's where the command and control of the 20th century and the 19th century worked in the workplace, because people wanted and felt they needed that sort of leadership. In the 21st century, people are accustomed to having what they want when they want it, and they're receptive to more of following by example than they are having someone take control and take charge. The second part of the dealing with attitudes in the cognitive area is at least provide a challenge that will make all staff see the manager in a respectful or better way. In order to stem that belief and that thought that forms that cognitive attitude, we have to make that manager be seen in a better light. I've seen many times to where a company may have another manager who talks badly or disrespectfully about another manager to fellow workers or co-managers. And that is exactly what we're talking about in this section, is that the manager has to be seen in a respectful or a better way. And a lot of times that means changing the attitude, or at least bringing the attitude to the surface to be managed and repaired, of seeing that manager in a better way. The second section with dealing with attitudes is that we have to do that by challenging the cognitive. Then the affective areas can be changed. So we challenge the thought or the belief. And now that thought or belief is now become effective because it's a feeling or an emotion. So by challenging the cognitive, we start to change the feeling or emotion. But as I said earlier, if it gets to this stage, this is a lot harder to rewind and to correct this attitude than dealing with someone who only has a thought or belief in the cognitive stage. So by challenging the cognitive, the emotions may be tied to insecurity. So the emotion or the feeling of the affective attitude may be tied simply to insecurity in their job. They might feel that there's retrenchments or redundancies coming, and they're insecure about their job, and therefore they're taking the task off of their work and putting it on self-survival. It could be skills. They may have been pushed or promoted into a position wanting the extra money, but then realizing they don't have the skills or the tools to then go ahead and complete that task as satisfactorily as they may want to. This is probably another little section as well, to where management may see that they're doing a great job, and they may overlook this section because to management, that person is doing a great job. But if we analyze the person's emotions and their feelings in the affective stage here, they themselves might not feel that they are doing a great job. They may feel that they're underskilled. They may feel that they're not able to do the task. And this is where management needs to place the affirmation when it's due to employees to be seen as a very effective leader. The other section is job satisfaction. So the emotions may be tied to job satisfaction. So if that employee is not fully satisfied with the job, they could have this attitude which has to be addressed to find out if they still want this job or not. The emotion could be tied to respect, could be tied to negative feelings in the workplace. The old saying of it takes one bad apple to spoil the batch, well, that is very true in a workplace, to whereas if one person's attitude in the behavioral stage, because it's a behavior for them, may lead the fellow workers out of the cognitive into the affective area, and now make that become a behavior for them. So this is where addressing the problem is a lot better than just burying your head in the sand and not addressing the problem. So the changes in attitude won't happen overnight. Attitudes are formed over a lifetime. So don't be discouraged if you experience some of these and you feel like you're getting nowhere, but trust me, persevere, persevere, persevere. Another last thing in these couple of minutes we have left that I wanted to bring up during this was about multitasking. It's a big part of our world, big part of our cultures, is that we can be more productive if we multitask. This is a huge myth in the workforce today about multitasking. So once we talk about the patterns of our life, if we're going to set up a good working pattern in our life and have it become a behavior in our life, do not multitask. Okay? Multitasking in the short term, what it does, it doubles the amount of time it takes to do a task, which usually doubles the amount of mistakes that are performed in that task as well, or at least the potential, or what I teach is the risk. We're managing risk. So the risk increases when we multitask. It also shifts your focus and diverts your intellect from picking up on the intuitive ideas or the changes that should have been made and that you would have had picked up intuitively if you were single focused. You can quickly deal, address, and complete a project, a thought, an idea quicker if you singly focus on that than trying to say, I'm going to do that, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to do the budget, I'm going to finish the cash flow, and you've got all this going through your head. In the long term, it changes the brain from being able to focus deeply on a single task well to what we call a rifle or a laser, which is the way our focus should be, to one that jumps around a lot. The human brain does not have enough connections to be doing two complex tasks at the same time and to achieve the same output. We can do 5 or 6 tasks at the same time, but our output is not going to be the same. So don't be conned into thinking it's better. It's not. Okay? In the course, we go into further explanation of this in the VAE process, which is the vision, alignment, and execution. So that concludes our topics today. If we, I'd just like to take this time to thank you for your time and your attention into this webinar. I know we're all extremely busy, and I greatly appreciate that you're concerned enough about your leadership skills to make the effort to get more training, so I thank you for that. Sometimes we think that formal skills-based training is more important than self-development. Once again, I'd like to debunk this myth and say that it's not. self-development is every bit as important as your formal skills-based training. So my questions to you to end today are you ready to make changes? And as a leader, you should always be ready to make changes. So once again, thank you for your attention, and we'll now open it up for an opportunity for you to ask questions. Thank you very much. So if any of you out there would have any questions, we're ready to take those questions now. If you would just type those in there. And in my courses, in my classes, there's no such thing as an incorrect question. Every question is valid, and every thought and every process is valid as well. So feel free to comment. Even if it's just a comment about the course, feel free to do that. Always ready and acceptable for any input whatsoever. Just one of the statistics I wanted to share with you as well is from a Gallup poll this year, put out in February 2015, that showed that 70% of all employment exits, okay, people leaving a business, were directly related to leadership practices. So 70% of all employment exits were directly related to leadership practices. That's a very alarming statistic. So that statistic alone should be enough for us as leaders to be able to take and say, hey, we do need to upskill our teams and our managers into becoming a leader. Even though they may be performing at a manager level, we need to be skilling them as a leader. So Sandos has sent in a question, and just a thank you. So I'd like to thank Sandro from having participated in the webinar, and thanks very much for your comment there. And we will we look at doing different webinars throughout the year. Informa has several different webinars on the actual calendar if you have a look. So have a look in those webinars and see if anything is of interest to you, and please register and sign up on the actual portal to partake in those, because it's very vital to get little snippets just to help you along the way. Abdullah has actually sent in a question. What are the recommended training courses for leadership from your experience? That's a very good question. It primarily depends on what you are seeking. A lot of leadership trainers tend to focus on standard, what I call cookie cutter sort of trainings. My training is different than that, in that I believe that as skilling and training our leaders, we don't need to try to push people into a box of being authoritative or a dictator or whatever. We don't need to try to classify people. What we need to do is try to take that person's natural skill set, Abdullah, and we need to ensure that we give that individual leader the tools and the skills that they need to enhance their natural capacity. If we're a leader in any way, shape, or form, we should naturally have the giftings to excel as a leader. So my approach is that we take and cater more toward enhancing the natural abilities. We give some predefined pointers to people, but it's more of developing that person. If you look at, Adila's question is really good, because if you look at a person and say, if you try to make a person do something, it's going to be a longer road to try and make them do the correct thing rather than trying to enhance their ability to do what they're currently doing. If that makes any sense and if that's pretty clear, because of the fact that we're catering to their natural bent, their natural abilities, instead of trying to push them into different situations. So also he says the recommended institute through the GCC in the Middle East here, we've got a long recorded history with, it used to be IR and now it's Informa, but Informa provides a wide variety of training in every field and every department. So Abdullah's questions on the Recommended Training Institute, through the Middle East here, through the GCC, you couldn't find a better training organization that sources skilled and experienced trainers than Informa. Okay? So once again, Abdullah, to let you know, the fact as well is that there's two types of training. There's the public courses, which are run yearly throughout different parts in the GCC, and there's also the in-house, which the in-house is scheduled at your company's time and availability. You get direct access to the trainer prior to the event to sort out any questions and any issues that you may specifically want to address, and that training is more tailored toward specifically your industry. So one of the biggest things that I like about in-house training is that I can actually talk about the oil and gas industry or a retail industry or a manufacturing industry. I don't have to talk about general subjects like I do in a public course. I can talk specifically about that industry, which the students and the leaders are a lot more familiar with, rather than talking about generalistic industries. So that's something that is to be considered when you're looking at training, is trying to gather your team in-house to have the trainer come to your location and train in-house, which gives you a higher level of personalized training rather than the public course. But once again, those public courses will be listed on the Informa website, and also the webinars, like Sandos had asked, they're listed on the actual web portal there as well. So pay attention to those, make sure you register for those and sign into those. And that just about concludes our time today. Once again, I'd like to thank Informa and the people here at the main office in Dubai and wish them all the best. And thank you very much for all the people who have listened to this webinar. And I wish you the very best of success as a leader. You are all probably already managers, but I just want to encourage each and every one of you to become a leader. So thank you once again, and I appreciate your time and effort into this broadcast, and have a great day and a good evening.